Okay, let's get started. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Melory Johnson, 25-year beauty veteran, advisor, and strategist. Welcome back to Pretty Equity, where we tackle the real issues facing beauty founders and investors and bring you the answers from the experts behind the scenes. Today, I am super excited to talk to someone I've been dying to chat with about a subject I'm absolutely fascinated by, but know very little about: AI. And specifically, in this case, AI in healthcare, because AI is no longer just theoretical, it's here and already embedded in diagnostics, workflows, regulatory review, and decision support. And now regulators, and I'm talking about the FDA and EMA specifically, are no longer watching from the sidelines. They're publishing shared principles on how AI should be built, validated, and governed in medical context. And this matters beyond medicine because the same systems thinking, evidence standards, and failure modes are starting to show up in our space: cosmetics, personal care, and consumer health. So today's conversation is about where AI is now, where it's going, and what happens when systems are built without accountability. With that said, I am thrilled to be joined by someone who does know a thing or two about AI, Dr. Frankie Aguinot. Oh my gosh, I hope I pronounced that right. A, a physician working at the intersection of AI, health, and human clarity. Frankie received her clinical training outside the US, but is also a US Navy nuclear veteran. For everyone who knows me, like my son. So, she's also deeply immersed in diagnostic bias, algorithmic fairness, and AI in high stakes environments. Frankie, thank you for your service and welcome to Pretty Equity. I am thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been so looking forward to this conversation.
Good, yay. Okay, so let's start by setting expectations because the public conversation about AI is very different from its actual reality. So, Frankie, where are we actually using AI in medicine today versus where people think we are?
Where we're actually using it. So that's a nuanced question. Where we're actually using it in a clinical approved setting is largely you're going to see it actually in radiology, just because it's one of those very data rich fields where it can really look at all these different pixels and deliberate and say this is here, this is good, bad, this needs to be reviewed. Then what I say, what's the not clinical way? So the non-clinical, non-approved way is honestly everyday people having conversations with, Chat GPT, with Claude, and saying, hey, these are my lab results. This is actually happening. They're putting out their lab results, taking a screenshot. What does this mean? And I think it's actually very important to mention both of these, because for a vast majority of people, that is their access to advanced clinical insight. They might not have the coverage to keep asking this, or their provider doesn't have the time to go step by step. So they turn to AI. And I think that spectrum is really important to keep in mind in all conversations where we are absolutely 100% clinically and where we're at in everyday reality for patients.
Okay. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And in radiology particularly, I mean that would make sense to me that that would be the first place to go. So what you're saying basically is that there are um some things that are already embedded, but at the same time, I feel like some things are completely overstated right now. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I don't know if you understand where I'm going with that, or if
I
just
think I
go ahead and
do.
react.
The way that what I'm hearing is more the patient experience where it's saying, we're going to do like all of these great diagnostics that has a lot more nuance than just, here's an X-ray. Like what, like, is it good, not good? If you have like patient history of like 15 years, different lab results, that is still in its infancy. We, you know, both Anthropic and OpenAI came out with their healthcare models. I think actually so did Amazon. They've come out with these models, and we really still are. I think it's a little overhyped,
Hmm.
but again, I want to take it with a grain of salt because there have been people who have used these tools and found actual real diagnosis that helped them, that their doctor missed. I'm going to be honest about that. It
Mm.
really has been game changing for some people, but I don't want to, I guess I just don't want to endorse, like, hey, this is really great, mature tech. It's not. It's a great thing to have in your back pocket and have as an option when you don't have many others.
Mm. Okay, so what I'm hearing you describing here is that AI isn't so much a replacement of, it's more like an amplifier that's, like you said, in its, even though it's inside existing systems currently, it is still in its infancy. And that's exactly why I want to have this conversation with you, because this is the part where I get super excited, but at the same time, I also start biting my nails because the thought
Right.
that, once you put AI in times into systems, particularly where decisions carry such high stake consequences, it really does change the game. So let's talk a bit about why medicine is such a high stakes AI environment. What actually, and this is for those, for the majority of those listening or watching our
Mhm.
conversation today, they're not from necessarily the world of medicine. So, I do want to take a little bit of a step back and ask you what actually makes medicine fundamentally different from other AI use cases.
So, a really great example to explain the difference between tech and healthcare, even though they're both very like intellectual and very technical, is the requirements behind them. Tech is very much, you know, go fast, break things, ask permission later. Healthcare is get the data, validate, revalidate, then tell us when you're going to validate again. A clear example of this is if you remember Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. If you actually strip away the healthcare aspect of what her technology was, she had the exact same playbook as every other Silicon Valley founder. They promised, they raised money, and they said, hey, we can do this. And then they were just building back, in the back in the lab, like, hey, we need to get to this. We need to get to this. The difference is that she entered into healthcare, which has a completely different set of requirements. I like to, whenever I have these conversations, I compare her, I can't remember the name of the founder, but to the company Juicero, where it was like a $700 machine that essentially squeezed out pre-made juice out of pouches. But it wasn't healthcare. It was not heavily regulated. He's not in jail. It's okay. It's just juice. It's not a big deal. But once you enter into healthcare, into this highly regulated space, you can no longer go fast, break things, and ask for an apology later. That's not how that works, and that's where I feel like the clash is coming in these two different cultures, is that regulation piece precisely.
Mm, mm. No, absolutely. I mean, look, the biggest thing in healthcare, and this is why our regulators like the FDA exist, is to protect the public health from harm, right? So let's
Right.
talk a little bit about, harm, because what would that actually look like if AI failed?
Oh man, it it can be as simple as getting like the schedule wrong of like you should be taking this morning and night, and it says just take it in morning. And to all the way to, hey, you should amputate this person's leg. You should do this very like it might suggest these very invasive things, or it could even hallucinate data that indicates that you should do these very invasive, permanent, irreversible steps. That's where it gets really, really scary,
Mm,
and why there's just so much, there's just so much talk, and there's so many things that are happening around like who's using the AI? What's it used for? Like, how is it being used? Where does it sit in that decision tree, right? So that's the scary part. Like, unless the patient asks, you don't know, is this AI making a decision or is it just kind of taking notes? And sometimes I feel like even the people using the tools don't even know to ask that question themselves. So if you
mm,
can't ask that question yourself, how are you going to empower your patient to ask those same questions or give them that answer proactively?
mm, mm. It sounds a whole lot to me like, the system itself and how it's being set up. I mean, the automation of the system, and then you talk a lot about automation bias. You know what I mean? So I'm sure that's showing up here in like real clinical settings too.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, it's taken so many, it's only been recently within the last couple of years that they've even used female cells to test, like do the step one, like step 001 of testing for drugs. That seems like a no-brainer. So we haven't even come to other factors like your age, your ethnicity, whether you've had kids or not. We haven't even gone down to male or female. So the importance of that is all of this data is biased. So the AI itself actually isn't biased. It's an algorithm, it's math. But there's this idea in AI they call garbage in, garbage out. You have biased data going in, you're going to get biased information out from it. That's that's what just happens. But when in healthcare, it's not just like, oh, this recipe that, might not work for you. It's, hey, it might make a recommendation that's not good for you, that's not meant for you.
Mm,
And depending on how it's being used, um, like we don't know if it's making a decision. I think in Utah, for example, they're actually using AI for prescriptions. Like, is it is it is it prescribing correctly? Is it asking the right questions? That's where it gets really dicey and frankly scary. And but it's now starting to become ubiquitous, and it does make life so much easier. It is generally accurate. It is generally helpful, and it's generally useful. But when it comes to healthcare, those edge cases are lives. It's not,
mm,
I'm gonna be able to, kill someone's faster on this video game. Like, it's not that. This is someone's life.
mm, mm. Oh God, yeah. No, this to me is where it gets absolutely terrifying because what we're talking about now is where the conversation shifts from performance metrics, you know what I mean? Like you were saying, video games, to actual responsibility. And
Hmm.
and like you were saying, I mean, in this space, a model that's just created to be right most of the time should be absolutely unacceptable, especially because the cost of being wrong has such real consequences. I mean, like you said, we're talking human lives here. So, in your work, you focus a lot on diagnostic bias and fairness, right? And we touched a little on that. But Frankie, where do most AI systems fail, and why does that failure so often go unseen?
Where the problem with is that the failure often becomes invisible and that you don't see it until you start to actually question it because the depend so in general AI is generative and it's the way that it's designed is it wants to give you an answer. Sometimes, depending on the system, not all systems, it will just say, hey, I don't know. But usually, the fact that it has to pick a binary, like, is it this, or this, or even just two, that causes an issue because it has to say yes, no. Not all systems are designed for maybe or hey, someone look at this. So that's number one, is we don't even know that it comes up. But for me, the failure is right now that I see the biggest one that I'm not answering your question, but maybe this isn't something that you've realized, is right now, a lot of these systems, we don't know who's responsible. There is no one, very Navy term, who does the buck stop with? When there's a failure in AI, is it the physician? Is it the person who coded it? Is it the CEO of this hospital? Right now, there's a lot of finger pointing. And I think that right now is what's causing a lot of risk because if you don't have skin in the game, you're not going to be as I feel like you're just not going to be as careful. You're not going to be as meticulous as you should be if you know you're on the hook. You think you are, but it's completely different if you're the name is the one signing the check, if you're the one writing it off, if you're the one that's going to go to jail, you're going to have a completely different level of meticulousness otherwise.
Mm. No, I mean it makes I mean that makes perfect sense. That's just human nature, right? But with these biases, I mean, I can't imagine that they're intentional, right? Although, you know what I mean? Look, we're still talking about medicine here, right?
Hmm.
But you start throwing into ideology and politics into the mix, and unfortunately, it has gotten way too involved in medicine more than I'm comfortable with. So, maybe some bias is intentional. I mean, otherwise, is it structural, accidental? Because I feel like someone is going to be excluded by default. And who is that? I don't know if you want to react to what I just said.
No, that's something that is hard to even trace. That's why we really need to you know, where these models are getting their data from. Like, is there any correction for it? Like again, actually, Amazon, they were using AI for screening candidates, and they were finding that they were actually excluding female candidates more than they should have been because their background didn't match what the AI was expecting. So I really, the people who design the AI isn't actually, they're not, I don't think it's on purpose, but I think that they're not going out of their way to make sure that they are overcoming the bias that's coming into their system via their data. I think that they're saying like, oh, well, my part's fine. Like I've done my part. My math works out. So I think that's where it becomes like on purpose is that their inaction has a negative outcome for other people.
And I mean, to me, this just reflects like immaturity. Like I know that we'd said in the very beginning, AI is in its infancy. But whenever I look at any company, the first sign of a company's immaturity is the finger pointing, where there's no one actually held accountable. No one is actually, responsible for anything. They get to point their fingers at whoever, whether it's the CEO or, a person on the sales floor. You know what I mean? Everyone
Right.
points their fingers at everybody. And I think this is going to be part of the growing pains of AI. But like I said,
Hmm.
what concerns me is that with AI emerging in medicine now, and it's one thing in radiography and radiology, you know what I'm saying? And even there could be horrible failures. But that makes more sense to me than, you know what I mean? Like, say what Amazon is doing right now. But the idea that something just works on average, it just in medicine, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. And I don't know, Frankie, am I wrong? But I mean, it seems like this is the part of the AI conversation that makes me, and I go so far as to say most everyone else really uncomfortable. Because these systems don't just, they don't just seem to be reflecting data, right? It's not just about the data, like we were saying. It seems to be reflecting priorities. And those are the priorities of whoever is the creator behind this, right? Whoever's creating these systems. Okay, so that brings me back to something I said in my opener, that regulators are now starting to pay attention. And
Yes.
as I mentioned, the FDA and EMA are now publishing principles around AI use in medicine. And before I get to my next question, I just want to throw my own opinion out there. And this is the part where I feel like AI is going to start maturing, is once
Mhm.
the regulators are involved. So from your perspective, though, what are the regulators? What are they most concerned about?
I think what they seem to be more concerned about right now is just prove your work. Is they want to see, why you're using it, how you're using it, and because these are all the questions that, you and I are discussing right now that people aren't, that these companies, they're not being forthcoming with. That traditional AI is happens in a black box. You put something in, magic happens, something comes out. And and regulators are saying like, no, you can't have an opaque black box. You need to explain what's happening in there. So I think that's where that shift is now they're not, now that AI is being used and for healthcare and that could, harm people and help people, to be honest, they want to know like you need to show us the man behind the curtain.
Mm,
You can't just do magic
yeah.
anymore. And I think that's where they're starting to wake up to the fact that it's been going on and that we need to really regulate this. It's not just enough for the molecule. We need to know what's happening with AI that is informing the development of this molecule. If you're using AI actually as a medical tool, because that's something that's very interesting that I've seen even on LinkedIn. Like, I mean, I won't even comment it. I was like, ooh, I feel like they should be talking to legal about that. That seems awfully close to becoming a medical device based on what you just said.
Mm,
So again, like I said, that's that clash, that culture clash again. Because I've been in sales too, and so like marketing, like you say all these great bombastic things, when you're selling water bottles, cool, you can do that. If you're proven wrong, cool, we'll retract it. No big deal, no harm, no foul. You can't do that with drugs. So that's where I think it's coming out is because there's so many people entering the healthcare space who've never been in healthcare, but are driving patient outcomes. The FDA, EMA, they're saying, oh, we need to pump the brakes. We need to know what's happening right now.
mm,
Let's roll this back a little bit.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. As the way I see it, I think the concerns from the regulators is less about the technology itself and rather about how it's being deployed. You know what I mean? That's what if I lived in their head, that's what I would imagine is worrying them most. So let's look at the flip side of this though, because AI is not just about what's scary. AI is also about what is, what could be and what is credible. So let's actually look at that. What does credible AI actually mean in regulatory terms?
Credible AI, it's about can you prove it? Like what is think of it as like an assistant. Like what's your credentials? What like where did it come from? Like where is this model from? Like where's your data from? That's just your credibility. Like your street cred. It's the credibility. That's where they really want to know all of those nuts and bolts that go into the AI. Want to see like they don't want to see right away like, oh, we're this percent accurate, this is how fast we are. We're like, no. Give me your bona fides. Tell us how you built this system.
Like you said before, no more black box. You know what I mean? No more input, black box, output. What happened? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But just a point to clarify for the audience. Okay, so we're not saying when we're talking here about the regulators, we're not saying that they're here to try to slow innovation. That's not it at all. It goes back to what I said earlier about harm. Regulators are here to prevent invisible harm. And to ensure that there is accountability. Because in the end, like I said, their job is to protect the public health first and foremost. Okay, so let's pivot here for a second and talk about how
Actually,
systems. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
can I
Go
make a
ahead, go
point
ahead.
about how you're saying that they're not here to slow down? Not
Mhm.
only are they not the FDA anyway, they're definitely not trying to slow it down. FDA actually is now using AI themselves because they want to approve drugs. They want to
Mhm.
approve these AI tools faster. So the FDA is not anti-AI at all. They're not trying to stop innovation. They want to get this tech and this medicine out. Sorry, I just had to interject. I'm
No, no,
like, no,
no,
they're
and that's fine because that was an important point to reiterate, is that like I'm always saying, regulation, the FDA, they're not here to slow entrepreneurship. You know what I mean? They're not here to get in the way of you making money or doing business. They're just making sure that it's, like I said earlier, not about the technology, but how you're deploying that technology, because that has
Mhm.
consequences. Maybe not so much in tech. You know what I mean? Maybe in tech it's a nuisance because you're going to have to, keep in mind that not all the answers you get are correct, right? The AI makes mistakes. But in medicine, it can't afford to make mistakes. You know what I mean? Particularly because there's also a mindset, a psychology, but with patient and doctor relationships. And when the AI is acting as the doctor, right, is acting as the physician, the primary care physician, and giving answers, the person who they're giving the answers to is going to take that seriously. And you
Exactly.
can't just be right sometimes. You know what I mean? Can you imagine going to your doctor? Oh my God, going to your dermatologist? You know what I mean? To have your moles checked, and he's right only sometimes. You know what I mean? The consequences. There are consequences.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So let's go back to the pivot here. I want to talk
Yeah.
about how systems are designed and how
Mhm.
that design again has real human impact. Because Frankie, you talk a lot about the human cost, right? Particularly of systems that are not built for everyone. Like we say, most of the time, right? A majority of the time. But there's still people being left out there in that most. So tell me, how do the teams that build these systems, and obviously there are no bad intentions here. Obviously, they believe they're doing good work, and I believe they're trying to do good work. But how do they totally miss the cost that, what I mean, that human cost?
The way that they miss the cost is, from what I've seen, is basically if you're building AI that's in healthcare, they have they might not even have any clinicians on their team at all, which is completely scary. Or they don't have someone with clinical experience and background that can stop the work. Like you might have someone on there and they like, hey, I made this recommendation. I think that, you should improve this or that. But if they don't have the power to stop it, they're not actually helping build that system. So I think that's the things that I've seen the most in the failure of some of these AI systems where it gets really squirrely is there is the overconfidence in the math, in the tech. Not that, and I don't think that they're being malicious. It's not that they definitely want to help patients, but there's just going to be that clinical experience that, a programmer is just not going to have. So that's where I would really like to see um, is these more cross-functional teams and definitely bring in a clinician earlier in the stream, but also have a clinician in that decision stream. That's that's something that I see that is missing often.
Hmm. How that's not happening. I mean, what's the disconnect? Like, how is that not happening? Is it incentive driven? Because if it is, I mean, alignment is being broken here somewhere. And I don't get it. What is the disconnect? Why is this not happening?
The disconnect is that these are very smart people who are building this technology. They're used to testing it in very sterile, controlled environments. They're used to writing papers and things being theoretical. That's why if you talk to any physician, Epic, sorry, maybe I shouldn't say the name, but Epic's the most widely used electronic medical record system in the world. And everyone complains about how it works. There's nested tables. Where do you go? You have to click here, da 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 da. And it adds so much time. If they talk to an actual physician, they actually talk to an actual nurse, they at the beginning step, not after it's been deployed. If they had done it at the beginning, they probably would have built something that was more user friendly because these systems and software were designed by software engineers, data engineers who don't really they just have a completely different mindset. So that's unfortunately that's the best that I've got. I wish I had something more juicy, but it's really they just don't know what it's like in these like hospital halls.
Mm-hmm. No, like again, it's back to what we said in the very beginning. It's because all of this is just in its infancy. You know what I mean? We're learning as we're going. It just, unfortunately, in this particular space, there are human lives at the back end of that. You know what I mean? And another
Right.
thought occurred to me, do you think it has anything to do with like speed? Like the idea that we got to get speed to market, and maybe that speed to market is outrunning reflection here. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
I think there's that. I think there is something to it. It's that as AI has matured, the barrier to entry and deployment has become lower and lower. So that way, it takes less money, it takes less time to actually put out something that functions. So I still don't think it's necessarily like trying to. rush it, but there is also, I guess there is some of that element where you don't want someone to beat your idea because it's so easy to create, to like just vibe code something off of one idea. You get it out and you like, oh, now you're left holding the bag. You had this idea, but someone got there first.
Mhm. No, look, I mean,
So,
the speed to market conversation, I mean, that is a debate that, we have in beauty all the time, because it's a double-edged sword. Yes, you want to be first to market, and there's a lot of pressure, particularly from certain investors, to be first to market. But there is also a downfall to being first to market because
mhm.
people who have the same idea or the same, notion are going to watch you from the sidelines and watch where you fail. You know what I mean? And watch to see how they can do it better. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. And
Like see if they
they
come
used
out
you as
first, third to
R&D.
market. No, say that again.
They used you as R&D. You came out first. This actually happened with AI, where people were saying like, DeepSeek, like how was DeepSeek able to come up with their AI model? And they developed it so much cheaper than OpenAI. Like, yeah, that's because DeepSeek had blueprints to follow, whereas OpenAI, they were first to market, like mass market, and they had to learn how to sail while building the boat.
No,
And
absolutely.
DeepSeek just, they already knew how to sail. Like, oh, cool, we'll just build a better boat.
Okay. Is this going to bring me to another topic here, where AI actually adds value and where it absolutely should not lead? So let's talk about where AI adds value first. Um,
Okay.
so, um, so where does, I'm just going to start off simple here. Where does AI add real value in medicine today? And where should it stay purely advisory versus, you know what I mean by that, right? We've got
Right.
where should it be implemented and where should it stay advisory?
The part that I'm really excited about is that it has shortened identification of like the targets in the body and figuring out molecules. So that's really excited. Where it used to take years and years to figure out, what molecule should we pursue, what target within the body should we be focusing on, it can go through all those iterations so much faster. So that for me, that's the most exciting part. And because right now there are still so many ailments and disease and illnesses that there just is no good solution for, not even a cure, just that's you don't even have answers to manage it well. You're barely managing it. So that's where it's really coming in. Like one of the things that I'm excited about. So this is more esoterical. I don't even fully understand it because it's a biostats thing. So the FDA had come out earlier this year that they're going to allow the Bayesian model when it comes to um, proving clinical trials. So again, I'm not a biostats person, but from what I understand, is it's a method of math that allows you to use a smaller sample size and say, hey, there was this other trial in the past that we've done or somebody else has done. Let's use some of that data and we're going to use that in our new trial so that way we can actually put in this application for a new drug you with less participants and you can go faster because sometimes you really just can't get 500 participants because it's a very rare disease. So things like that. I, I should say for the audience, I'm not affiliated with the FDA. I don't have a peek into how they're doing things. Where this is all just kind of a feel and based on how the trends are that they're going. But with how sophisticated and complex this math is, I think it would be natural that the FDA is leaning on AI to validate this math because it's math. Like it's yes, no, does one plus one equal two? That makes sense to ask AI, hey, does this check out? So those are the things that I'm really excited to see about AI is that the FDA is really showing clear signposts that they want to use AI specifically for deploying faster and more drugs out there for patients and to really help them and make an impact in their lives.
Mm. Look, I mean, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that one of the biggest upsides to AI is time saving, right? Like think about the man hours, the manpower to like you said, just go through metadata. Do you know what I mean? Just go through just everything that's out there and just to try to discover it for one. You know what I mean? Some of them are behind paywalls, whatever the case is. Um, you
Yes.
know, um, and yeah, to me, that's the biggest upside with AI is just how much time it can save us. But so diagnostics versus triage versus workflow support. What decisions still require irreducible human judgment?
I think that you really still need to have there's still an art to it because you might be like just asking like the same clinical questions, but if you look at them and you're saying like, hey, there's something still not quite right here, that AI might it's not they're not going to pick up that nuance. I actually haven't seen the pit yet, but I saw this very interesting clip that was shared where hopefully this is not a spoiler for your audience, but basically there was a doctor who was saying like there's a resident and then there's the doctor who was they were kind of discussing this patient and the resident's like, this seems viral, let's just have him go home. But the senior doctor's like, there's something not right
Mm,
and you still need to trust that.
mm, mm,
And it turned out that his intuition was correct. There was something further wrong with this patient. So I think that's the part is that you can't replace the history taking, that initial assessment. You still need to put eyeballs on your
mm.
patient
No,
is
absolutely.
e even if it's on, video chat, it's best if you see them in person, but you still can't rely on that history taking to be with AI because that's where I'm starting to see that trend is like, hey, give us all this information, give us your labs, and then we'll do an initial clinical impression. But there's it's still it sounds woo in the land of medicine, but there is still something to be said about that clinical eye and that clinical intuition that you will never be able to replace.
Mm. You know, it's funny you say that because I like the idea that an AI, okay, t talking about it purely from a time saving standpoint, right? It's gonna spit out, information. You're gonna, like you said, you're gonna put the information out. It's going to spit information out, right? And that's fine as a starting point. But
Hmm.
it's like being a really great diagnostician, right? There's an art to that. And sometimes it can't be taught. Sometimes, like you say, it's all intuition. It's all a feeling that you get. You've done it long enough to recognize. You've seen things in the past that, stay with you. But you know what I mean? That comes with experience. And that's like you said, you have your tenured doctor doing rounds, in the hospital with his students, with his, what I mean, his interns. And, what I mean, the students and the interns are learning. They're going to spit out the information that they've learned, right? Here's the history, here's everything. So they're pretty much doing what the AI is doing. right? The
Mhm.
AI just does it much faster. But
Right.
in the end, they're learning from that tenured physician because he's the one who's been around long enough to have seen all different angles and all different outcomes. So, he's the one who intuitively knows this isn't this. I have a feeling it's that. Let's test for that. You know what I mean? And that's not
Right.
something necessarily an AI could pick up. And look, for the audience, we're just having a general AI discussion. We're not there's no resistance here to AI in any form. Hopefully you've picked that up. But I think our conversation is really more along the lines of where does AI belong, right? What is its role? What is, where does it fit into the whole scheme of things? And talking of fitting into the scheme of things, okay, Frankie, let's translate this into beauty now because cosmetics and beauty is actually why we're here today. So, my question to you. Okay, so when beauty brands talk about AI in terms of safety, claims, or personalization, okay, what should they be most cautious about?
They need to be the most cautious about crossing the line into being a medical device because it's extremely easy to say that. Like, it's like, oh, we can help you feel like we can, like let us pick out your lip color that brings out your eyes. That's okay. There's nothing diagnostic about this. But once you get into, oh, here's this lip treatment, and then you start saying it could be these list of diseases. Oh, now you've skated really close, or maybe even crossed into the line of a medical device. I think that these cosmetic companies, when they're going to be using AI and their marketing, they really need to have someone on their regulatory team really look hard at their language,
Mm.
which, I'm not very familiar with the cosmetics industry, but I wouldn't imagine that they've really invested in the past to having their marketing copy being that heavily scrutinized. And it's not just your not just what's online, it's going to even be coming down to like your salespeople. I think the cosmetics really needs to start taking a page from the pharmaceuticals because once you start having AI, it's really easy to blend into these diagnostic places rather than, just something just for fun.
Mm. No, no,
So
absolutely. Look,
that's
you,
what I
you,
do.
you're spot on. Even though you don't come from the world of beauty cosmetics, you're spot on because everyone here watching and listening knows that the space now is highly regulated since MOCRA, since it was implemented in 2022 and then brought into or made into law in 2022 and then actually, brought into effect in 2024. The Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act now is holding brands responsible for anything and everything that they say about their product. So that's the labeling, right? Labels, what's on the product, labeling, what you say about it, marketing. So, to your point, I wonder, talking about having regulators there, having your regulatory team on board, having, every time you have any conversation that is that is marketing based, there should be marketing, regulatory, and legal. Those three should always be sitting in the same room together because it's that important if you want to remain on the market. But it was just making me kind of wonder out loud about how great it would be if AI could start getting involved in the regulatory space because And I'm not saying, oh, for all of those people, these regulatory people who are now hating me for saying this because they're thinking that I'm taking their jobs away. No, not at all. I'm just thinking in terms of time saving. There's regulation. Regulation differs across every region, right? And in the United States, it's even across every state.
Hmm.
California regulation is very different than Ohio or Florida. So, when you have a time saver, like an AI system that could go through all of the regulatory because there are laws. They're yes, there's nuances, and yes, the conversational, the people to people conversation would have to be had about, okay, this is what the AI spat out. You know what I mean? Let's have a conversation about this. Are we comfortable with it? Let's call in legal, you know what I mean? Fine. But man, would that save time? That would save so
Right.
much time.
And
Okay,
I
so
would like to reassure,
yeah,
I'd like to reassure anyone that, then your audience that isn't regulatory with do not worry with MOCRA, with you coming towards pharma, you are not going to run out of work. Even with AI, there is just going to be like congratulations, I guess, in a weird way. Congratulations, you have so much work ahead of you. There's the from coming from the pharma experience, like right now, cosmetics has entered kind of into like the baby pharma stage, and it's just all regulation. Like even, you know, like, you know, like the slide decks, like what you can write in an email, the everything that we are communicating outside is so heavily regulated everything. So that I want to reassure your regulatory audience. No, you have so much work. You will not run out of work now.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about a theme that runs through beauty all the time. That's over-reliance. There's over-reliance on your R&D team. Without the brand owners getting involved. They just put things, they outsource, right? Try to outsource responsibility. They try to outsource. So where do you foresee, talking of, predictions here? I mean, you
Mm.
just predicted all this workflow for our regulatory colleagues, but so where do you foresee an over-reliance on AI in consumer and particularly cosmetic products?
Wait, can you
So talk about
restate the
over-reliance.
question?
Yeah,
Over
like
reliance on
yeah,
AI, like
over-reliance on AI specifically, like when it comes to
okay.
consumer and cosmetic products.
I think the where you might start having the over reliance is on the R&D, just because now the R&D is going to become much more complex. And with the systems in place, they're going to need to, your stakeholders, your shareholders, they're going to still expect the same momentum and tempo of output, but now they're not understanding the additional paperwork and steps you need to take. So it makes sense that you're going to start using AI. So I think that's like my very non my amateur armchair look into cosmetics. I think that's where they run the risk of over reliance on AI.
Well, all I can say is well done to you because not that that was a right or wrong answer. It was just your instincts were spot on because we're starting to see it already. We're starting to see, we have clients coming and, they say to me, I want a lab to make this. And I take a look at this, you know what I mean? This formula. And I'm like, where did you get this? You know what I'm saying? And it's clearly AI generated because there are still, like you say, there's nuances. There's things an AI is not going to know about formulation and about formulating. So, you know what I mean? It may look fine on paper, but if you've been doing something long enough, eh, not so sure about this. Are you open to some changes? You know what I mean? So yes, you're 100% right. We're starting to see it already. You know what I mean? That AI is becoming the new formulator. Okay, so what lessons from medicine should the beauty sector absorb before regulators start enforcing it?
I think the lesson that actually even pharma needs to learn is that your documentation is going to be parsed by AI. So the FDA on December 1st, they put out a they just told everybody, hey, we're gonna deploy agentic AI agency-wide. So that means everything that the FDA touches, not just pharmaceuticals, so pharmaceuticals and cosmetics. So the previous iteration, ELSA, it was basically kind of like Google for FDA documents. They could just ask questions about the documents like, hey, give me a summary of this, or what's this about? So this is an evolution, and they reached 70% penetration within the agency. So now there's just going to be coming more and more information with the same amount of people. So why is that important? If you know it's going to be read and parsed by AI, you need to have your documentation clearly being able to be read for AI. You need a write for AI. So, what does that really mean? So, for instance, throughout technological history, whenever we've had new technology, we've adapted actually our language. When there was typewriters, to make sure that we knew that there was a new sentence starting, we used to double space. Now we have computers. We don't need to double space anymore, but that's a language thing. Beeper codes, again, we had this tech, there was a limitation. So we adapted. We came up with beeper codes. And I think that's where the signposts are all going is what I term as data hygiene. You're really going to need to, it not only does the data have to be good and has to be accurate, but you don't want to confuse the AI. Um, so there's this, it's a technical term um, where they basically it kind of chunks the information differently. So COVID space 19 is read differently from COVID dash 19. So if you and I read this, a human like, oh, it's COVID-19 is COVID-19. But if you give that to an AI and you multiply that by hundreds and hundreds of pages and multiple words, it could get really confused. And if you have millions of dollars on the line, do you want to confuse the reviewer? No, make it easy for the reviewer. So I think that's the lesson that everyone that is going to be submitting to FDA really needs to like absorb. And any just any sector that's going to have their work scrutinized for by an AI system, but specifically right now the FDA, they've already told you we are looking at you're using AI to look and evaluate your documents.
Hmm. I mean, hey, listen, you warned our regulatory colleagues that there's more work coming from them. So you you already warned them. So you just filled in some blanks there. So yes, I with this new implementation now by the FDA with specifically when it comes to safety data and data in general, one of the things that I talk about all the time because it's it's something that so many, beauty founders brands miss is not having documentation, not having the right documentation, not having it from the beginning. They tend to try to gather at the last minute when they finally need it. It's kind of like a check the box instead of part of, you know what I mean, the system that they create, their success system, right? They check the box at the end. Oh my God, do we have all of our docs? But now it's going to become more complicated because it's not just about do you have all of your docs? Do you have all of your safety data? It's going to be, who's submitting it, right? And do
Hmm.
they know how to submit it? I remember when in another lifetime ago when I was still working on, in the med device world, and we were, doing, submitting, 510(k)s or whatever it was, or de novos to the FDA, and you had to know how to submit these documents. It wasn't just about what to put down and what to attach. You had to
Hmm.
know what language to use, and I think this is going to be a big lesson for the beauty industry. Is that, guys, you're going to have to stop paying attention, particularly when it comes to data. Okay, so Frankie, with your investor hat on, pretending you're an
Yes.
investor now and you're diligencing a brand claiming AI-driven personalization or worse, safety. Okay. What would be the first question you'd ask?
My first question is where's your data from? That's it. That's the foundation. I don't care about your LLM. I don't care about your tech team. Where did you get this initial data from?
Mm,
Full stop.
yeah, yeah. No, it's exactly like you said earlier, just to reiterate, you know, garbage in, garbage out, right? Um, okay, so even though most of us are not new to beauty, we're all, and I'm talking about on this, in our audience, we're all pretty new to AI. So whether it's medicine or cosmetics, the way I see it, the underlying question we should be asking ourselves is the same. Do we understand our own systems, or are we outsourcing judgment? Because that's where you'll find yourself stepping on landmines, as far as, the brands are concerned. So let's talk about the future. Not hype here, but let's just go walking into the future. So Frankie, 5 years, 10 years from today, what does
Ooh.
success? I know, can you see that far? Put on your
I'm in
binocs.
AI, that's like a million years. Okay.
Yes, right. Okay. So all right, I'll be nice. 3 to 5 years from
Okay.
today. What does success with AI in medicine specifically look like if we get it right? Because my thinking is that it's going to translate directly to beauty.
For me, what I want to see as success is that it gives time back to clinicians. I want them to be able to actually go back to the old way of doing medicine, where you spend 20, 30 minutes, an hour, however much time that you need to spend with your patient to actually know what's going on with them. That to me would be successful AI deployment.
Mm. Yeah,
That's, yeah,
saves time
that's,
saving. Yeah, that's what we were saying. It's all about time. And you can imagine how that would translate to beauty. It's not so much about, time spent with patients, versus on your computer doing busy work. It would be, to me, I would see it in exactly what we were talking about before, data collection, data analysis, maybe Coptis, maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe, in a lab, certainly in the world of of regulation, the regulatory guidelines worldwide. I think there's so many places where AI would just be such a time saver. Um, okay, so following on that same thought, what does failure look like? And how would we recognize it early?
ooh, failure to me would be that the patient only interacts with a computer. The only time that a physician is involved is when it comes to the final decision, to the interpretation, to actually signing off the prescription. To me, that would be an absolute failure where your your interaction with your physician is just seconds and almost technically non-existent, I mean, practically non-existent from the perspective of the patient, because that's something that I think is terrifying that I see is that right now they're trying, they're putting AI into hospitals, and then they're asking doctors, why are you not seeing more patients? Like that's
Mm.
concerning to me that's what you're trying to do. So if you extrapolate that out, you want the time, and that means that to them, success would be you get to see your physician for 30 seconds, and that's terrifying.
Yeah. No, I don't like that at all. I that and the likelihood of that is what scares me because that's a very likely scenario. Looking at something that's less, but still prescription. You have some of these cosmetics that, they drugs that, live in the beauty space, hair regrowth or those kinds of things that require prescription. And now you just go on to whatever company, whether it's him, hers, or whatever, whoever it may be, and you just order online, you answer 5 questions, and they send a prescription to you, and then once in a while you may get you never speak to anyone, you never speak to a doctor, you know what I mean? You just get the prescription. So to me that's a very real scenario. Yeah, that to me would be an absolute fail. But the problem is like you said right in the very beginning, it's who is deploying this because hopefully with the FDA involved, the FDA would recognize that as a fail. But for those people who are selling systems, you know what I mean? If they're going to, a board, a board of a hospital and saying, hey, we could get you this many more patients if you did it this way. I mean, how enticing would that be for the board? You know what I mean? To say, oh, well, we could make this much more money, or we could, what I mean, pay off our debts this much faster, whatever is driving them, whatever's incentivizing them to make those decisions. This is that's scary because it's very real.
Right.
Okay.
And that's not something that the FDA or regulators are looking at. They're looking at efficacy.
Mm,
If they're seeing that having, a 30-second patient interaction, and, if you're seeing 1,000 patients a day, and, and you're saying, oh, well, 996 of them are doing really well, like because it's just routine cases, the FDA would be like, oh, cool, this sounds like a great system. This has a really high rate of working. Let's go ahead and approve it.
mm,
So that's the scary part is what are the metrics that we are looking at? And right now we are still very much about those numbers. And there's not really a way to quantify the quality of time and the quality of patient care that is meaningful that you can put in a spreadsheet.
mm,
Because in actuality, the number of minutes that you spend with your patients, the longer it goes, it's actually seen counted against you
mm.
and not as a positive thing. So it's a twofold, you know, it's a twofold negative experience.
Yeah. Look, I don't know how this is going to go, but I mean, quality care is still very much a conversation. It's not a conversation that's going away anytime in medicine. The quality aspect, talking about doctor-patient relationships, but it is a real fear. I love the idea of AI being such a great time saver and being able to free up time for doctors to be able to be doctors, right? But at the same time, is that free time going to then be filled with more patients because now we freed up all your time. Now you can take more patients. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm really
Hmm.
hoping that this conversation that we're having now is part of the conversation that regulators or whoever it is would be having when they decide on what failure looks like. Um, but I have no control over that. We're just here to wait and see, Frankie. We're just
Right.
we just sit on the sidelines and with bated breath wait for what's going to happen next. Okay, so finally, before we come to the end of our conversation, is there anything else you want to say to the audience? Any last minute thoughts, advice, optimistic or cautionary?
I I'm going to do an optimistic caution is don't be afraid of AI. If you go into your doctor's office and you see in the hallway, a disclaimer that's saying, like, hey, we are going to use AI. Have faith that, these systems aren't designed to hurt you, but keep in mind they could. Make sure that you have a right as a patient to ask questions. You can ask how is this going to be used? How is this going to be stored? Um, and that's valid. So that's I think right now is the key takeaway. Um, is it's generally a good thing, but be informed, ask questions, and it's your right to ask questions. And if they don't have an answer, like email somebody. I know we're all busy. Email somebody, post about it online, because the more that people see this and have visibility, the more this conversation is going to shift. It shouldn't just be physicians, it shouldn't just be AI professionals. We really need to have everyday patients really speaking up for themselves as well and saying, this is how this affects me. So then when we have these big clinical and regulatory conversations, we can we can get that data, we can scrape that data and say, hey, there's this post, there is this patient, they had this negative experience, or they didn't have this question answered. What are we doing about that? But advocate for yourself is I guess the thing when it comes to anything about medicine, but definitely about AI.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree. We all have to be, advocates for ourselves, with everything. Stop and question, ask, you know. Like you said, it's our right. It's our right as human beings to ask questions. So, as we just discovered from this conversation, AI isn't necessarily a risk. Unexamined systems are. And as AI becomes infrastructure, not necessarily a feature, the advantage will go to the teams who can prove their outputs are credible, accountable, and built with humans in mind. Frankie, thank you for being here today, not only sharing your insight into where we are in AI today, but also grounding this conversation in reality. And for those watching or listening, if you found this video valuable, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe here on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow me and Frankie on LinkedIn, where we share more expert insights on the issues and answers that drive smarter beauty investment. I'm Melory Johnson. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you all next week.